Coming to you from Studio HQ, you're tuning in to Thinking the Extra. Coming to you from Comic Crusaders, I am Dodgy in the mixing up with Tracy. Hello, Tracy.
Hey.
And we're going to have a massive special guest with us today. But before we dive in, let's talk about our sponsors. Tracy, you want to hit us up with what Simon Comic Creations is about?
Tydeman Comic Creations is a platform and community for anybody who has a story within them, whether you're a writer, whether you're an illustrator, whether you're just curious. We run classes, workshops, and courses for all ages, from 8 to 800. And you can find us on all social media platforms or email us for more information at info@tydemancomiccreations.ie.
There we go. And also, we're going to talk about Buying the Comics Day. October 1st is Buying the Comics Day. If you're a creator like our guest today, reach out to your local comic book store. Make it an event. It's basically Artist Alley in your LCS. Welcome. We've got our special guest, Tad Pietrzykowski. Is that how I pronounce your name?
Don't hurt yourself. It's actually pronounced Pietrzykowski.
Oh,
Thank you.
But I'll settle for Tad P.
Tad P. Thank you. Thank you, Tad. Tad, just tell us a bit about yourself. You know, obviously you've been working in comics for quite some time, but when did your love for comics come about?
Well, if we need to hit the Wayback Machine, then that's easy. It all started when my dad brought home my first comic after he came home from work, and I was like 5 years old or so. And I've got to tell you, I was smitten from the start. And from that point onwards, I knew that I didn't want to write other people's comics. I wanted to write my own character.
Yeah. Okay. And what was your first comic?
So the quest was on from my... The Dark Nebula was in development that entire time. I remember in fourth form, actually, that's the other thing too. I always rocked at composition in class. I mean, I was never the most popular kid in class, yet when it came to compositions and us reading our compositions out, everyone shut up and listened to what I had because they knew they were in for a treat. And we were told on this one piece that we needed to write something creative. And I thought, well, okay, let me at least start to put my thoughts down in terms of
Yeah, Tad, I think you're cutting out.
And the teacher was very impressed. So I continued to develop it. Mind you, I had a different working title for the character at the time, and it wasn't until I was doing my higher school certificate a couple of years later that I decided I was going to call the character Dark Nebula, and that this was going to be my major work in art in the
Oh, the joys of the internet interfering with the ways of stories.
I read back on what I did back then in 1977. It had a lot of work to go. So when I was doing art college in 78 to 80, that's when I decided after class to take the idea to the fat farm, so that by the time I completed my 3 years of art college, I came out with the completed story. Now, this is where you're going to roll your eyes and go, I can't believe this. I got off the train because I went to art college in Wagga. So I got off the train at Sydney with the completed story in a notebook, and I left the notebook on the train.
Oh,
The entire
no.
completed story of the origin of the Dark Nebula.
Because how long was the train ride from Wagga Wagga to Sydney? Because that's a fair distance away. So Tad, what got you into comics?
Well, it all started when my dad came home one night after work and gave me a comic, and he would always bring a treat home for me. And once he started bringing home comics, that was it. My fate was sealed. And from that point onwards, not only did I enjoy reading comics, but I liked the idea of not just reading comics, I wanted to write them, but not other people's characters. I wanted to create my own. And for a 5, 6, or 7-year-old kid, that's pretty ambitious.
Wow.
And so all throughout school, I guess you could say that the Dark Nebula was almost like my imaginary friend in whatever form it was taking. He was my constant companion as I was trying to develop the story. And I mean, I guess you say that imitation's, some form of flattery anyway. So it was very inspired by certain comic characters and certain comic themes. I can even tell you now that during school, his costume resembled one of the character's spiritual fathers, who I won't name at this point. And I literally wanted to take the whole thing. I literally tore it down and built it back up again to be the character that you see in that graphic novel, the dynamic Dark Nebula. I mean, with the costume that I had previous to this one, which I still remember, I could almost just introduce a new character in that costume, or as a variant from another timeline, or some crap like that. Anyway, But in fourth form, I remember my English teacher wanted us to do some creative writing, which I did. And even though I wasn't the most popular kid in school, whenever it came composition time, everyone shut up and listened to what I had, because they knew it was going to be comedy gold. And I did this composition of the Dark Nebula. It was probably the first half of the origin, and the teacher was just wrapped in it, thought it was so engaging, and there was a lot of work to be done from there, but at least it was the first iteration of it written down. And then come the HSC a couple of years later, I actually did the Dark Nebula as my major work in art, 6 or 8 panels plus a script, and I got graded decently on that. I was quite happy with that. But then when I look back on the script that I turned in for that, I knew that there was a lot of work still to be done. So that in my
still an amazing achievement,
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to be your own worst critic. You have to be there, rather than if all you're doing is if all you're going to do is just appease yourself, then you're not going to develop, you're not going to grow. And I can always see room for improvement. I mean, you have to be your own worst critic, because otherwise you never improve. Anyway, so the 3 years at art college, I literally took the concept so much to the fat farm that by the time I completed college and I got off a train from Wagga to Sydney, I had in a notebook the completed origin written in longhand, basically, and almost as if I could just take that as a manuscript to a book company or whatever. But unfortunately, dopey me left it on the train, and I know, pretty savvy.
I actually feel sick for you.
And how long was the train ride from Sydney?
I knew every word of it. So I just went, okay. And I just went and I wrote it all out again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I wrote it all out again. And following that, as I was trying to adjust to life with my BA in unemployment, or my diploma, whatever you want to call it, I knew that it had to see the light of day in some form.
Yes.
And I did at one stage mock it up as a series of Sunday comics. And I pitched that to the local newspapers, the Sydney newspapers, and it was seriously there for consideration. But I got pipped at the post by Judge Dredd.
Oh no!
Oh, how could that happen?
How dare those Irish artists draw so well?
Well, they drew better than me, I can tell you that now. Although, the further I got into it, the better I got at it. But after doing that first graphic novel, which then followed, if I wasn't doing it as a Sunday comic strip, then I'm just going to put it out as a graphic novel. And thankfully, I was in a position to do just that. So 82, actually in 81, that was the year I worked on it. But by the time I'd completed the artwork, and I was very disciplined putting it together, I would literally complete a page a day. So that page that you see there, the introduction page, it would take me a full day from blank sheet to the last line put down.
Wow.
And that's the way it was for every page of the book. So 64 pages, 64 days. And then, of course, the cover was a day on its own. And between the, working out the pacing and the scripting and everything like that, and finally laying down, committing every last line to the graphic novel, it took me basically 5 months to put this book together.
Wow.
And I remember I was saying that to one of my friends, because I was going to radio school at the time, because I was also looking at a career in broadcasting, which in fact was my bread and butter for many years. And I said to this guy, it took me 5 months to put that together. And he turned around and said, well, it took me one night to read it, and I wanted to kill him.
It was the best and worst compliment you ever got.
Oh, absolutely. And look, it put things in perspective. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm the last person you'll find will have a big head about themselves with all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Because my favorite line about Dark Nebula is, I'm glad it's more memorable than landfill.
Oh,
I mean,
God.
you got to roll with the punches.
Oh,
Exactly.
And in all honesty, all I wanted to do was get that book out. I didn't care what happened afterwards. If that's the only thing I ever did, I can look back and say, gee, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah.
But,
and can I ask you about your... Sorry, Tad, do you mind if I just ask you a quick question? So in terms of the creation, did you work with anyone, like an editor or anyone, to actually guide you through, or was this basically all lonesome?
Well, all of this was lonesome, but you have to understand, I studied what was available to me. Back when I was at school, I had Paul Power, who had gone on later to doing storyboards for motion pictures in Hollywood.
Ooh.
He was lodging at my dad's place at Tempe, and he was working on Sunday strips for Airhawk and the Flying Doctor, and then his own one, Professor Om. And so you have to understand, there he was at the dining table working on all these, and I'd be over his shoulder and studying everything, studying how he would do the lines for the lettering and the page size and everything. I got all those specs, and it was by keen observation. Like I said, back when I was a kid looking at comics, reading comics, I wasn't just reading comics. I was literally absorbing them, taking everything in. And I would see which ones I enjoyed reading and which ones I didn't. I found the writers who really resonated with me, and I also knew the ones who were basically mediocre. I mean, I've got maybe a half a dozen primary writing influences in the likes of Roy Thomas, Steve Englehart, Steve Gerber, Chris Claremont, who to this day, I consider him to be, the apex of all of that.
I was very lucky to have met Chris in person, and man, he's a humble dude. He's so nice.
Oh, he is. I know.
Yeah.
He and I did a signing together at an OzCon Comic Con. I think it was 91 or 92.
Okay.
And this was just after he'd been taken off X-Men. Because Marvel wanted to tell everyone these aren't Chris Claremont's X-Men, they're Marvel's X-Men. And he was obviously pretty cheesed off about that. But he got into things. And when we were doing this signing, it was more him signing and me handling, although I did get to sign some Dark Nebulas. He was telling the story of how the next story he was going to do in X-Men was how Wolverine was going to be the next villain they were up against.
Oh.
And he told the story in such detail. So fast wind 12 years, in the Wolverine title, the story Enemy of the State comes out. Mark Miller is supposedly the writer of it, yet I didn't see anywhere story concept by Chris Claremont. So he was telling me like 12 years earlier from the release of Enemy of the State, this story that he pitched to Marvel, and they actually said to him, "Oh, we can't do this because Wolverine's in all these titles." And at the time, he actually had a good reply to them. He said, "Well, you got the Punisher in 3 titles, and in one of them, he's black."
Yeah.
Now, you can't get past that, but Marvel just stood firm, and they ended up just taking him off the title. And I've seen mock-up art from Mark Silvestri of what would have been part of that storyline had that gone ahead. You know, as it is with Chris, you know, when they run out of ideas, they literally loot the rejected story pile, Chris Clemens. And he actually said somewhere, it's a cycle of 5 years. He'd pitch an idea, they'd say no, and 5 years later, someone else would do that story.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
the house of other people's ideas.
That's it. It's the big business of the big companies, and I think that's why being an indie creator is so important these days. And yourself being an indie creator for so many years and being so still loving and enjoying the whole nuances of making and discussing about your own comics. That you don't get that with the big companies anymore, and I think that is what we need to be showing people nowadays, being like, do your own stories, give a bit of your soul, you know, hand over, and even if it's crap, put it out there because it's your crap, you know.
Well, that's right. I mean, there was a period of 10 years where I was pretty much committed to doing Dark Nebula, and then I took a break. Now, in that time of that break, and that was because of, you know, having to deal with the publishing side and the printer and distributor being, well, let's just say not exactly honest and forthright. I needed to see a better climate for it all to happen. Now, in that time, I threw myself wholly and solely into my radio, and you know, there it was. The Dark Nebula was pretty much absent without leave for the longest time. And I had a near fatal car accident in 2003 where my jaw was busted. I mean, a radio announcer with a busted jaw, the defense rests.
Yes,
anyway, while I was lying on broken on a gurney at this hospital, I realized that there was going to be the cycle of employment to unemployment to employment to unemployment and so on and so forth. And so from that point onwards, I decided to stop putting things off. And I thought something that I had thought of in that 10-year period that the Dark Nebula was absent was to put him on the internet. And the first call that I made, well, when I say call, I mean, there I was typing because my jaw was wired. I contacted Gary Challoner, who was one of my partners in crime in Cyclone, because after the Dark Nebula did his debut, and we'll deal more with that in just a moment, because in fact the release of that original book in 1982 did start the landslide of social networking of comic creators here in Australia.
Nice.
But anyway, the first call I made after my car accident, while I knew I had all this time of convalescing, I had 3-4 months of convalescing, and so I asked Gary, how do I go about putting my stuff on the internet? And he said, well, I can help you with that. And we very slowly and steadily worked on thedarknebula.com. And in 2006, October 2006, that launched the same month as the Heroes and Villains exhibition at the State Library of Victoria. And they actually approached me and said, look, we'd like to include Dark Nebula in there. And I said, yeah, sure, no worries. And I just thought it was going to be a part of the exhibition, nothing more. And I was blown away by the fact that they actually made the Dark Nebula the centerpiece of that exhibition. I'll just see if I can lay my hands on the iconic piece of artwork that was the piece that they decided they wanted to go with, because it was actually a Glenn Lumsden, Dave DeVries combination. Glenn did the artwork, and Dave did the colouring of it. Never work with children or animals, or imagine that you're going to be able to find the piece of art
you need to.
at just the right moment. There it is. Okay.
Oh, okay.
This was the piece
Oh,
that was
wow.
used as the
Nice.
centerpiece. It was the cover of Dark Nebula number 6. And all their literature, all of their, their flyers and everything like that promoting it. I got the idea, I need to go down there and be there for the opening of the exhibition. Well, anyway, I decided to do that. And while I was doing that, I was also looking at getting the suit remade, because I used to have the suit back when I was younger and sillier and fitter. Let's just say the Dark Nebula always made personal appearances. But my number one rule nowadays is don't wear the suit. Always find someone else to wear it.
Pay somebody to wear the suit.
Exactly. And look, whenever I've been to conventions and I've had the suit with me, I've always found someone who's decided, oh, what the heck, no one will know it's me under the mask. And that's the beauty of it. You don't know who is under that mask.
Yes,
and I've had many people put the suit on at conventions in recent years. Anyway, so yeah, I went down for the exhibition, the Heroes and Villains exhibition, and I was totally blown away by the fact that as I rounded a corner, there was one white wall, except for this life-size, or larger-than-life image of that image I showed you
Wow.
on the wall. And
They're defining
I could
moments,
think of-
though, aren't they?
Well, they are. And look, in all honesty, and I like to maintain that I am humble about these things, I can think of, off the top of my head, 4 different characters who are internationally known who could have just as easily had been the centerpiece. Fatty Finn, Ginger Mix, Felix the Cat, or Airhawk and the Flying Doctor. All 4 known internationally. Yet they chose the Dark Nebula. And that told me that graphic novel from 1982, which you're seeing the first double-page spread there on the screen, that was considered a mile marker in Australian comics. Now, I don't have any illusions about myself about, the fact that I'm the guy who started it all, because the fact is we had Golden Age comics. There were, I guess you could say, Silver Age comics and Bronze Age comics. And the most recent thing prior to my releasing my Dark Nebula graphic novel, back in the 70s, I used to look at what Gerald Carr was doing with Brainmaster and Vixen and also Vampire, as well as the work that Monty Webb was doing in the Sunday papers for Bold, Ben Hall or Ned Kelly. So all this stuff was there, you know, to show that other people were doing things. I mean, there was Roger Fletcher doing Torcam, but I'm sorry, I was never a fan of that, because that all started with really bad Barry Windsor Smiths and Gil Kane swipes from Conan the Barbarian. Was,
yes.
Anyway,
So do you think the time that you had at the very start, because you were such a strong character within yourself, that you knew that these original characters had to stand out and be authentic?
Yeah. Well, I thought if I didn't want Dark Nebula to be a carbon copy of everything else that came before and anything else that would follow, I had to make his origin unique, and I had to make his power unique as well. He has access to the well of souls, that little spark of energy that keeps us going through life. Individually, it's meager, and when we die, energy cannot be created or destroyed, merely transformed. Elevation of energy, and it has to go somewhere in between lifetimes. Now, individually, it's meager, but collectively, imagine if one person could harness that. That's the Dark Nebula. So, yeah, and in many ways, it's also my thesis on life after death, because I lost my dad when I lost my mum when I was 10, and I lost my dad when I was 20, in the senior year at college. So, I drew a lot from personal angst. What was going on inside. I used it as fuel for the engine. And that's important. That's why in that original graphic novel, I actually dedicated to the memory of my parents. And like I said, I didn't know if I was going to do anything more after that. At least I got that out there. But as I mentioned earlier, once that book was released, that started the avalanche, which was the social networking that started in its very early stages. I had a letter from a 12-year-old Jason Paulos to that first Dark Nebula, asking anything I could tell him about putting comics together. And despite what little I had to share, he came out the other end. And 6 years later, he was the series artist on Dark Nebula, doing at least 3 issues. He did issues 6, 7, and 8, as well as short stories in Southern Aurora Comics Presents. So that was one of the first social networking. But here's the funny thing. There used to be a comic store in Sydney called Comic Kingdom.
Yes,
and that was owned by Steve Smith. Now, I knew Steve Smith since I was 13, because I was buying comics off him since I was a kid. And he knew I was putting Dark Nebula together. Gary Challoner, who is a big name in his own right as well, he approached and asked him, is there anyone else that he knew that was doing comics? And he put him straight on to me. Now, funny story, when I first met Gary, everything was at the printer. I mean, the cover, all the artwork. I didn't even have a bloody sketch of Dark Nebula to show him. And here I am trying to tell him what this all was. And so when it came back from the printer, he could see exactly what it was all about. And from that meeting was the beginnings of Cyclone Australia. So it was first Gary and myself. Then I brought Glenn Lumsden in, because I'd been trading with Glenn Lumsden since we were in secondary school. He lived in another part of Sydney, and he used to always see what Paul Power was up to at my dad's place and all of that. So it was starting to be a little bit of a click, and then the final piece of the puzzle came along in the form of Dave DeVries, because he'd done work on Oz Comics, and so he brought the Southern Squadron along to Cyclone, and that was the four of us. Now, a few people have actually likened us in terms of Australian comics as an equivalent to what the Beatles were for music. And I don't know what I was, whether I was Ringo or George, but you know, I always kept out of the spotlight. So maybe I was George, or maybe I was Ringo. Who knows? I don't know. But yeah, I mean that's actually quite a heady comparison to make, and not one we take lightly. I mean, like I say, none of us have got big heads of ourselves. It's very important that we keep everything in perspective. But literally, that was how Cyclone got started, on the back of the Dark Nebula graphic novel, and more networking happened. I mean, I knew there was networking going on in Melbourne because those guys were moving and shaking down there, you know, what with Reverie and whatever. But, you know, we were doing our thing, they were doing their thing. And it was nice that there were people doing these things, even if it was in different parts of the country. And I guess you could say everything's kind of come full circle, because now the Dark Nebula has a home at Reverie.
Yes.
Anyway,
I think that's the thing, isn't it?
Long and the short of that.
Yeah, I think being able to do that full circle makes a huge difference in the community aspect of what you're doing. You know, it's very important for people to feel part of something. And, you know, when you start something and then so many, you know, comics later and years later, you're still that influential in its own right. It's a huge, you know, nod to you guys, and to be as humble as you are. You know, it's an unusual thing to get.
Yeah, and mind if I ask? So when you brought out your books, who were the main distributor? Where were you selling them to? Were they being sold to news agencies or?
Well, with the original graphic novel, I put it out and I had it at the printers, and I went to Gordon and Gotch and said, "Look, I've done this." And they said, "Well, usually it has Gordon and Gotch in there, you know, like it's got to be printed on there." And I didn't know that, but they took the book anyway. They were the only game in town at the time, and I remember them saying they took 55% of sales, and I thought that's a bit rich. But you know, I thought, well, what the heck, you know, they were the only game in town. Let's do it. Let's roll the dice. So I had them distributed nationwide, and it did extraordinarily well. I think it did like 7,500 out of a 10,000 print run. It was magazine size as well. Incidentally, just for a stroll down Amnesia Lane, here's the original painting of the Dark novel. You can tell that's the original painting because there's no logo or anything. So yeah, that was something I had fun working on.
And did you find that was the process of writing and illustrating?
Yeah. Anyway, after it had its run at the newsagents, I was able to get the Sydney returns, and so I very cannily had them send those Sydney returns off to New Zealand. So the Kiwis got to experience the Dark Nebula as well. Yeah. Wow. Anyway, I have a lot of people asking how they can get a hand. Sorry?
I said the Kiwis, they do love a good comic.
Well, they do like a good comic. I mean, I've just as much love for the Kiwis as I have for the Irish and the Scots. All these Anglo countries all around the world. I like to think that we have something in common. Actually, interestingly enough, when thedarknebula.com was launched in 2006, I got a lot of fan emails around the world. And even though I always consider this just to be an Australian comic, I found that it broke down a lot of cultural barriers. I had fans in Italy as well as the South American countries. So it was nice. Hey, you take it from where it comes. In fact, for a while, I was a part of an English-speaking, English-reading Italian comic book forum. They just couldn't get enough of it all. That's when, after I had the darknebula.com launched, and I started to release the color trades of the previous material, which was shown on the darknebula.com. There was a lot of people really ate it up, so to speak, which was great. And that's again, that told me that this wasn't just an Australian comic. It had universal themes.
Definitely.
That's important.
In relation to black and white versus color, when you had to go back and decide to color your comics, how did you feel about that?
Well, to color them, I have to tell you, my earliest efforts at coloring weren't that good. In fact, the colorized version of the story you see on the screen there, Dark Nebula 1, I look back on that coloring and, oh my God, it was rank. I have plans to have someone go over them and hopefully, unclunk the coloring. But there were some coloring efforts I did, which I was actually quite proud of, especially when I had the Dark Nebula Origins graphic novel, which was I guess you could say, a contemporary take on the origin of both the Dark Nebula and his partner in crime, Planet Earth. And I actually did pretty well with doing the colouring for that. That I'm proud of, but some of the earlier colouring in Dark Nebulas 1 through to, well, actually maybe just 1 and 2, or even just number 1, it was, I don't know, pretty garish, for want of a better term. Maybe I could go back over it again, but I think I would just as soon get someone else to, give it that fine touch that it needs to elevate past. Because sometimes when you're working on something on your own, you get tunnel vision. And
True.
Thankfully, my tunnel vision evaporated when I started working with artists. I mean, the first graphic novel, I did everything. In the credits, it'll say writer, editor, artist, letterer, inker, and janitor.
I love that. Yeah.
That was
But then when I started working with artists and they would have my script, it was like, here's the gauntlet. Here's the story idea. And I worked in what I believed was the true spirit of the Marvel method. I gave the plot with plenty of room for interpretation to the artist. So I'd say, here's the story, do it justice. Then they'd come back with the art and say, here's the art, do it justice. And I have to say the lights really came on with Dark Nebula number 3, the start of the Chaos War, and the art that Glenn Lumsden turned in for that. I'm looking at it thinking, now, I could do a very, very mediocre Jerry Conway type script, or I could really go to town here. Well, I went for option B, and I never looked back after that. Literally, I grew as a writer from having artists. Exactly. And actually, Dodgy, you held up the Dark Nebula 10, the dinosaur in Tasmania. The story behind that is that story was actually written over 30 years ago. It was illustrated over 30 years ago. And it's been sitting in inventory all that time. Well, last year we decided, okay, we dipped our toes in the water with Dark Nebula 9, which was an anthology reprint issue, which sort of reintroduced people to the characters. But then with number 10, Dinosaurs in Tasmania, he was back. And I didn't want it to be another, see, one of the reasons why I took a break from doing comics back in the early 90s, at a time when I actually had Mike Richardson's attention at Dark Horse, was I was feeling flat. I felt that too much stuff was mediocre, and I just didn't want to add to the pile of mediocrity. So I needed to recharge my batteries. So I missed a great opportunity there. But maybe it wouldn't have been such a great opportunity if I wasn't into it, And we can play woulda, coulda, shoulda all we like, but when it came to scripting Dinosaurs in Tasmania, I literally left that to the last minute for a very good reason. I wanted to make sure that it was the best it can be, and the best it could be is not something I slap together and then try to massage. I wanted to make sure that it landed every punch that it could. I mean, there's one very funny joke that I set up earlier in the book, and of course it pays off right at the end of the book. It all has to do with a photograph. And, it was a very risque joke too, because the Dark Nebula has gone out in the bushes to have a leak, and these photographers take a photo of what they think is a dinosaur moving down to eat bushes, and the photographer has screwed up the macro zoom on the camera. And Dark Nebula picks up on this, grabs the camera. Anyway, I'll leave the rest to your imagination. But it's one of those jokes that it'll either land or people will go, that's crass, or that doesn't work, or anything like that. But we hit the bullseye. One thing I learned in my years in radio, brevity's the soul of wit, and if you can find a way to tell a joke and make sure that it's not ham-fisted or ham-handed, then you've won. And that's very important. So, doing the script for that, actually the one that I've got in the works now, the Chaos Theory, which is the sequel to the Chaos War, I've actually completed every part of that story. I've just got to get covers finished and editorial pages, little things like that. And that will be done and dusted as well.
It's so funny that you would refer like the little things that need to be done. It just again shows your wealth of knowledge of you've got your scripting done, you're ready. So getting somebody to do a cover, that's not an easy job unless you know somebody. The editorials again. So it's like, wow.
Actually, let's talk covers.
All right.
Let me just find this one cover. It's probably in the other pile. Oh no, there we go. Okay, here we go. This is another iconic cover. This is the cover to Dark Nebula 8, which for many years was the final cover or the final issue of the book. Now, when I was working on this was part 2 of the Southern Squadron crossover. And in the forefront, you see the villain grandstander with a can of spray paint. Now, I decided the best image to get them all there was he would walk past the poster of the superheroes. Now, we were either going to do either have the word suck across the top there, or have to deface all their faces. Well, without word of a lie, the same week that that book was released, Challenges of the Unknown #1, Volume 2 came out. And what was on the cover? These kids graffitiing this poster of the Challenges of the Unknown and defacing their faces.
Oh.
Now, it would have been, people would have looked at that and gone, oh, you copied that. Well, I had no idea it was coming out.
Yeah.
But we made the right choice with that one because I wanted the simplest image. It summed everything up with grandstand, put Australia's greatest heroes suck. Well, it's a very simple image,
but it's a powerful one at that. Like, I think that's the whole idea, isn't it? It's giving especially with front covers, because they're so difficult, that you want to make somebody interested and you want them to pick it up and read it, because that front cover pulls you straight in there. And if you don't get that straight away, then they never bother looking at anything else or anything before.
Well, if you look at that cover for Dinosaurs in Tasmania, Dark Nebula 10, I thought, well, what cover did I want for that? And of course, there it is. And there's only one cover I wanted. I wanted a T-Rex.
Yeah.
And that's why I've got the blurb on there, warning, this scene does not appear in this story, but you've just got to read Dinosaurs in Tasmania.
Yeah. The minute I read the Dinosaurs in Tasmania, I was like, oh, this is going to be fun.
Well, see, that all started from there was a filler article in the Sydney Morning Herald, I think it was, and I've probably still got, I've still got the clipping, and it was all about how someone theorised that maybe the inland lakes of Tasmania were not unlike that of Loch Ness on the other axis of the globe. So literally, there's Loch Ness and there's Tasmania, literally on the opposite end of the world. And I thought, that's cute. And literally that's where the germ of the idea started.
Nice.
Make your own Nessie.
Exactly.
Well, that's right. And look, it's more an examination of the human condition, because everyone wants their 15 minutes of fame. Yeah. And there were many years in between that I could have released it. I could have released it with the release of Jurassic Park or The Lost World or Loch Ness, or even with Walking with Dinosaurs.
Yeah.
But, it wasn't until the technology was on my side. Print on demand means I don't have to sink a ton of money in a single issue. And of course the beauty of print on demand is every copy that's made is sold.
Yeah.
So that is so important.
And it's one of the best things that have come out for the comic creators, again, as an indie creator, not having to sink so much money into the printing costs, because that's where it kills us.
It really does in the waste as well. Like, not waste, but you have excess boxes in your storage, and you can't push it. It's really frustrating.
Well, when I just after the darknebula.com happened and I was starting to release my graphic novels, print on demand was still in relative infancy, and I hooked up with kablam.com in Florida. And thankfully at the time the Aussie dollar was in good shape, and it wasn't a nightmare to get things posted over. And so I got, as I had a book ready to be printed, I would get that sent across. Now I went along to a supernova with my first two colour trades of the Dark Nebula Origins and the Southern Cross Special Edition. And when I was in Artist Alley, what I found was that things had devolved so much that there were folded and photocopied comics that people would literally be drawing in biro, and they would get them printed up and they would try and charge $5 for them. And that's how far back everything had fallen to in many cases. I mean, that's as far as a lot of people's thinking was. That wasn't everyone. That was just some people.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw that, I thought, wow, there we were putting out quality stuff of Cyclone back in the 80s and 90s, and now it's down to this. I can tell you now that when word went up and down Artist Alley like a brush fire to say, you've got to see what Tad's got. And these colour trades could sit on a bookshelf alongside Gotham by Gaslight or, Red Sun or any number of those colour trades.
Yeah, for sure.
Demanded FaceTime to find out how the hell did I do this. And I wasn't going to keep it a secret. I said, I'll give you all the information you need. Kablam.com, indieplanet.com, a printer and a retailer all in one.
I see. Okay.
And I sent a lot of business over there as a result of that. Now, thankfully, locally, we've got a far bigger print on demand scene. We've got a few people. I opt with Jeffrey's printing with Baden Kurgan out because he does a bang up job for me. And when I actually print Dark Nebulas 11 and 12, I want to get the two printed together. Release 11, wait a couple of months, release 12. And that way, I've just got one print bill and I service the audience in that way. And the other thing too, with dealing with Baden at Jeffrey's, he said to me, if you want to get 500 books out, he said that 500 books can be 50 each of Dark Nebulas 1 through to 10.
Yeah.
And I thought,
wow.
So that's something to keep in mind. And, I've got variant covers now for different books. I'm having variant covers for 11 and 12. So it's nice that all these things are there. It's literally making up for the puritanical way things were, dealing with people like Gordon and Gotch and NDD and Hannon Print and all those people, because those were the things that probably sucked the life out of me, because creating is one thing, but publishing is another. I believe the publishing side is not so much a train wreck as it was back then. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's still difficult.
Well, that's right. And look, we always learn as we go.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I'll see if I've got some more stuff to show you as well.
Well, it's all part of the journey, right? Learning on the fly, trial by error.
Yeah.
Ooh, wee.
There we go. This is Dark Nebula 5. That's the colour bromide. Now, Glenn Lumsden illustrated that, and Dave DeVries did the colouring for it. And it's just nice to have all these pieces as part of my library.
Well, yeah, as your collection of your life's work, it's
Yeah,
important to keep these things that are important.
Exactly. Yeah. Actually, here we go. You were looking at some double-page spreads before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow, yes.
There's the original artwork with the caption on there, and janitor.
Yeah.
And that little signage there in the bottom corner, that's wax, isn't it?
What's that? No.
No, it's not.
No.
Is this how you drew it?
Yeah.
Oh, look,
wow.
These pages fade with age. So
I see.
Wow. Yes, another one.
Wow.
Without word of a lie, I have all the pages to this story.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Make sure they're kept safe and in a fireproof box, man.
I've actually had 2 fires. One which was a house fire, and the other which was a series of shed fires. And I've been very lucky in each case. Oh, hang on.
I think that's upside down, is it?
Sometimes it's better that way.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right.
It's amazing.
So yeah, that's some of the.
What's your legacy? It's your legacy right there.
Well, that's right. And look, don't get me wrong. I always believe that it's the whole thing of getting by with a little help from our friends. No, I get by with a lot of help from my friends, some of which unfortunately can't help anymore for health reasons. This is the cover to Cyclone number 7.
Yeah, wow.
When I attended the Perth Supernova, the first Perth Supernova, I caught up with Gary Challoner there, and he gave me that piece.
Wow.
And I was just so delighted that he felt that I should have that one, because to have an original piece of Gary Challoner artwork is a gift. So,
sure. And I think, again, as an indie creator, it is so important to build that circle of friends and that the circle of trust and community, so that we can rely on each other when we need to. And, hey, I have a project and it'd be amazing for you. Fancy coming on board? Let's have a pint and see what happens. These are the way. And people have forgotten that, I think. And I would love for it to go back to people being more open to the fact that collaboration is always available.
It really is.
Well, during the last 2 years or so, while the world's been losing its mind over COVID, there's been something that we've done, and this was an initiative started up by Dave DeVries. We used to have, in Sydney, what we called the Ugle Club. And the Ugle Club was basically a weekly get-together where we all just sat down, had a drink with each other, and just talk bullshit all the time. We'd literally chew the fat and all the rest of that. And this got restarted by Dave in Zoom conferencing. And every Thursday night we all get together. A lot of the time we just talk rubbish, but last Thursday night, for example, Dave was asked the question of, well, what was the end of Cyclone for him? And he was talking about the different projects that came up, the different opportunities that came to him and to Glenn for their collaborations in any number of paying gigs. And it was interesting that they would have a paying gig that would that would see them through. And when it got to the point where it looked like it was going to dry up, it's more a matter of jump rather than getting pushed. But there would always be something else, and they were always gainfully employed in that. And we were talking, he was talking about all of that, which was great. But, we have creators old and new that join us, and we don't know who's going to come up on any night. I mean, every now and again, it's great to see Gerald Carr make an appearance. And I have a lot of respect for Gerald, because, he was doing it before any of us. So, he's one of the older guard. And, it's also good to see newer people joining us and that sort of thing. So I think it's great that we have that social networking going on, even if we have to be socially distanced. Now, it's over 2 years worth of Ugle clubs on a Thursday night. So that's saying something for the idea, and it's still going strong. Some nights it might be actually when we know we're on a roll is when there's enough people who chime in for it that we've actually got literally the Brady Bunch window.
Love that.
Which is great. And I discovered recently that you can move people around, so whoever you wanted to be Alice became Alice.
The joys of technology, and
well, that's right. And look, we've had a lot of newcomers join us, and I think some of them sort of get the idea, well, we're only newbies here, but no one there's got an ego about them. We park the ego at the door, and we're just there to talk rubbish, and and we're there for each other.
And when you're there, like, what would be your biggest one big piece of advice you'd give to newbies starting off, besides don't be afraid and just do it, what would be something you would suggest?
Okay, for newbies, this is what I believe the definitive thing that everyone needs to take on board. When you come within range of a cliche, spin it on its ear. All there is to it. Because if you're going to do something that every man and his dog has done before, why are you doing it? And I learned that myself the hard way. I thought, nah, this is getting a bit much. And that's why, like I said, for me personally, I felt the light really came on with Dark Nebula 3. I mean, sure, I'd done everything before that, and it had obviously proven popular. But literally, I felt like that was the launch pad for what.
When you got into your stride.
Yeah.
And look, nothing excites me more as far as being a writer is concerned than coming up with a unique concept.
Yeah.
Because it's the closest I'll ever know, apart from being a father, to actually giving birth to an idea. So
yes.
people have to realize that, sure, there's going to be things out there that are similar. And look, I've seen people do stuff that I'm thinking, no, sorry, mate, I did that first. And I think how close it is to what I did, say, 10, 20 or 30 years before. So,
No argument.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's the other thing too. We talked about the costume design. It's red, black, and white. Well, I did that long before, gee whiz, Star Trek Next Generation. So, yeah, everything from the costume design down to the colouring and everything like that. I mean, the Dark Nebula was red, blue, and yellow at one stage, but then that was part of my let's throw this out and let's go with something different. So, yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's it. It's so fun to kind of look at your body of work and see the transition throughout the years as well, and the art styling progressive changing and adapting to what was happening at the time.
Actually, I'm going to show you something that is completely different from everything. This is a painting of a dark nebula. It's done by my partner's father, a fellow by the name of Ken Rafe, and he did this one for me.
Very impressive.
It is mine to do with as I will. And I think, given that I have the character Dark Nebula, I plan on using that as the background for a cover.
Yes.
Ooh, very nice.
And there it is. Instant collaboration. That's what I'm talking about. It's, get these friends, family, people.
You've got to do. No,
interconnect.
That's right. And look, I am the first person to admit I didn't get here on my own, because there's Glenn Lumsden, Gary Challoner, Dave DeVries, Jason Paulos, Shane Foley, Bo Jardine, any number of people who I've been in contact with over the years, and we all influence each other. We it's like the whole ripple effect. What would the ripple effect be if you hadn't engaged that person? And it's so important, because we all learn something from each other. I have no idea what people learn from me. Who's this dickhead? But the truth of the matter is, there's something to be learnt from everyone we come in contact. Actually, one thing that people need to be aware of: if I find a name that I absolutely love, it's going in my comics. I mean, that's why
really
in Dark Nebula called Dr. Meiklejohn. I knew this girl named Meiklejohn years ago. That was a surname. And another friend of mine who I'd known since kindergarten. You know, his surname's making its way into one of the comics. And in fact, this guy I worked with when I was doing casual labour hire as a sideline, the sweetest, nicest person you'd ever meet. But I thought of his surname and I thought, I'm going to make this a villain.
Oh,
Flip it on its head.
Nothing against him, but his name just screamed to me that I needed to do something with. And that's going to be probably the story which I would like to think will define both Shane Foley and myself as storytellers. That I have slated for Dark Nebulas 14, 15, and 16.
Wow.
Okay.
There's a little Hebrew right there. Woo!
Okay, Ted, I need to ask you some wrap-up questions now. And what part of you do we find in all your stories? What part of Tad P do we find in your stories?
Well,
everything you've written.
My humour.
Okay.
You'll find my humour in there. In fact, when I was doing Dark Nebula 11 and 12, given how popular Dinosaurs in Tasmania was, and here I am launching back into another cosmic epic, it could have been another, oh, look, we're full of ourselves now. And the readers would probably think, well, why bother? I have to say, I literally litter this 2-part cosmic epic, which is pretty serious, with so many pop culture references, it makes your head spin.
Yeah.
So that is part of it. But also, I like to leave people thinking about what they've read, so that when it comes to the message, it's not something that you smack them over the head with. It's something that's there to be seen, but not, oh God, did you have to do it that way? No. Yeah. Everything's there. And I think it also has to have some substance to it. Because let's face it, when you've got thousands of comics you can read on any given day, what's going to stay in your mind? What's going to be memorable?
Yeah, well, that's important. And what do you listen to when you make comics? Like when you're writing, do you listen to music, or what triggers your imagination?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question, because music does inspire me. There's one story, Dark Nebula 2 was called Asylum. Okay. I was inspired by the Supertramp song of the same name. There's a short story in one of the Southern Aurora Comics Presents issues, which got reprinted in Dark Nebula 9, called Road Trip. I'm a big Eddie and the Cruisers fan. I love those movies. That story-wise, there are weak moments, but the music by John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band, outstanding. So, yeah, that was inspired by one of the Eddie and the Cruisers songs. The other thing that inspires me is when I'm traveling. Like, I get behind the wheel of the car, or if I'm on a train or whatever, the ideas come to me unbidden. Literally, the ideas come to me very unconsciously. I remember there was one story that I had to write, and this was actually a story I wrote for another comic before my graphic novel. And to write it, I decided, right, this is what I'm going to do. I bought a train ticket. I lived at Tempe at the time. And I bought a train ticket to East Hills, which was the terminating line at the time. So I got a return ticket to East Hills, hopped the train and back. And by the time I got off the train back at Tempe, the story was written.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is it just something about the noise and the atmosphere that really got you going?
I think it was just, I don't know, it was just the movement more than anything else.
That rhythmic.
Yeah. And I wouldn't know which car trips get me the most inspiration, but there was one character I killed off and then I had this idea that maybe I could bring him back, and it just happened that the idea came to me on this car trip, and I thought, oh, you beauty, you know. So yeah, I mean, and look, you know, we see characters killed off and brought back so many times. I thought, no, if I'm going to do this, I want to make it count.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay. And have you read anything lately that you're enjoying, comic book wise?
Well, I don't know about lately, but I'll tell you what because I'm a huge Silver Age and Bronze Age fan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, one of my favorite characters growing up, and I felt was inspirational towards what I was doing for Dark Nebula, was Captain Marvel, the spaceborne hero.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And if Marvel ever tapped me on the shoulder and said, what would you like to write? I'd say I can bring back Marvel without invalidating his death and without demoting Carol Danvers. And just rereading the miniseries they did leading into Secret Invasion, which was the fake out Marvel's back, but he wasn't. He was actually a Skrull. And I'm just enjoying that because I like Lee Week's artwork and Stefano Gudiano, if that's how his name's pronounced. I noticed him on Facebook, and I thought to myself, "Oh my God, look! You know, I've got to friend this guy because he inked Lee Weeks, and I love Weeks stuff. I mean, art-wise, I can list off any number of artists inspirational. My number one key inspiration artistically, Steve Ditko. Then Jack Kirby, and then the avalanche follows from there. Neil Adams, Jim Steranko, John Byrne, any number of other people. Like I say, when I read anything by any of these people, I'm literally dissecting it because it's important to just take whatever you can from it. And look, the other thing that I find inspirational too is watching DVDs. At the moment, I'm going through The Dead Zone again with Anthony Michael Hall, and it's just interesting. Some of the themes they use in that are metaphysical, and others literally are ahead of the curve as far as what the current state of politics in America is at the moment. I mean, I am astonished at all the things that I'm seeing in this show that's, practically 20 years old, going, oh my God, this episode's a plague episode. What have we got? We've got COVID. Back then they're talking about SARS. And of course, following that, there was Ebola and all that sort of stuff. So it's interesting how these things go in cycles. So, But I think it's very important to expose yourself to any number of influences you can. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to be influenced by something. And like I say, if you find something that you absolutely love and you want your thing to be just like that, just make sure you don't try and do a carbon copy, because everyone's going to say, oh, this is just like that. It's like when George Lucas showed Roy Thomas his idea for Star Wars. Roy turned to him and said, oh, you read a lot of Jack Kirby, do you? Because basically it was a rip-off of the New Gods from DC. So, yeah.
No, that's fair.
The imitation game, eh?
Yeah, all right.
You got something there to show us?
Yeah, I'll find something else to show you. Oh, no, I've shown you that one. I've shown you that one. What's this one? I've shown that one as well.
If you were to poach any artist to illustrate a cover of Dark Nebula, who would be on your wish list?
Well, I can tell you in all honesty that when I was doing the original graphic novel in 1982, I had one name in mind. Had I been able to get over my uncertainty of fear of tyranny of distance or anything like that, and I was able to contact him, he would have been the artist. I would have had illustrate that original graphic novel. I'm talking of Michael Golden.
Oh, yes.
Very
No,
interesting.
I'm very familiar. Yes.
Yeah. Well, look, I was reading his Micronauts with Bill Mantlo, and they blew me away.
Yeah.
That was very inspirational. He's
Yeah.
one person I'd love to work with. One person who actually friend requested me on Facebook, and sadly he's no longer with us, is Rich Buckler.
Oh, really? He drew that?
No. This is Glenn Lumsden's artwork.
Okay.
I wish that I could have got Rich Buckler to do some art. Who else? Actually, I'd met Walt Simonson many years ago and got him to autograph a stack of comics for me. I'd love to see him do a Dark Nebula illustration. I mean, there was actually a thread on his Facebook page where he was talking about people trying to get free sketches out of him, and I just said, look, no free sketches. They're just going to flip them on eBay,
Yeah,
exactly.
But if I was to get anyone to do a sketch for me, it would be a Dark Nebula sketch. I mean, I've got a Howard Chaykin Dark Nebula head sketch for me one year. But I'd love to see Walt Simonson do that, because when I met Walt and Wheezy when they came to Sydney, there was this one iconic image that he did of Iron Man, and it was the Gene Colan Iron Man. And I remember, as clear as it was yesterday, him just sitting back with his eyes closed saying, I could do the Gene Colan Iron Man with my eyes closed. And all I could say, and that was the pose he struck, that he just sat back, and you could tell that he had a special love for the Gene Colan Iron Man. And I would have loved to see him just have a go at Iron Man. I mean, he's done the odd Iron Man illustration, which is reminiscent of that. But with what Walt brings to the table, I mean, he's blown our minds so many times, so much so that he deserved the cameo in the movie Thor.
Yeah.
That's all I got to say about that.
That's all we got to say about that.
and the same with Chris Claremont with X-Men. He got to do his cameo in the X-Men movies.
Yeah.
So, that says it all. It showed how influential they were in something they didn't even create.
Yeah.
They brought their creativity to the table, and they took it places that no one imagined at the time, because for the longest time Thor was such a dead, awful title. And then Walt Simonson came along and he gave it the shot in the arm that it did. It was like he got the paddles and resuscitated a dead title.
Yeah, because to be honest with you, between Kirby, Simonson is really when it picked up again, because the Kirby run in the late 60s was pretty amazing as well. But
yeah, well, I got to read those as they were released. My first four was
you son of a gun. Oh.
Yeah.
No, I'm very envious.
It was a wondrous time. I mean, I got to see new artwork from people like Kirby, Ditko, Steranko, Adams. All these guys. When they came in, Brunner
in their prime.
Yeah, Brunner.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Stalin.
Stalin, yes, absolutely, Jim Stalin. Yeah,
So you've got this wealth of information hitting you as a young man, and it's just poured out of you. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well,
but you look at the names now are like living legends. That's all.
And look, I will say this too about all of them. I like how you can friend them on Facebook, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not like you're trying to live in their pockets or anything like that. Yeah, I know there's the odd one who, when you put a friend request in, they just don't bother, and I think, well, that's a shame. It tells you all you really need to know. But for the most part, seriously, for the most part, they are sensational. And one guy who I enjoy having a bit of banter with every now and again on Facebook is Tom Morgan, who came in the 90s and was doing Iron Man, and he did some Power Pack and all sorts of other stuff. And he had to do the Marvel house style. But when he does his daily, he does a daily piece, which is just different from everything you expect from, and he shows his range. And I've seen that of a lot of other artists, like Al Plastino, who was one of the creators of Supergirl. Now, his stuff was done in the Mort Weisinger Superman era, but when you see his sketches, you think, wow, how underused is this guy?
Yeah.
And even fine art from people like Frank Robbins or even Don Perlin. Just, they can do so much more, but they're told, do this.
Yeah.
And there it is with blinkers on. They have to do it that way. And you don't get to see the length and breadth of their talent.
Yeah, who they are as an artist.
Exactly. The only one you really get to see of that was Bill Sienkiewicz. He started with the house style, and then he just came out of nowhere.
Ran away.
And look, the stuff he was doing on Moon Knight, that's literally when the lights really came on. But past Moon Knight, I mean, obviously, he evolved during his time doing Moon Knight. And then he went on to New Mutants. Yeah. And it was getting very surreal. But, that was showing that the title didn't need to be just a certain way.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. But in terms of, coming back to Dark Nebula. So you mentioned before you're having issues, 13 to 15 coming out soon. Am I right about that?
Well, 11 and 12 will not be that far away. They'll be in the next couple of months. And literally when they're released is exactly the 40th birthday, because this is the 40th anniversary.
Yeah.
So literally when these are released, they're going to be at that time. And another project which I am going to blow the whistle on, because I know for a fact that the art for the first issue is complete. We're doing a 3-issue mini-series of the Dark Nebula and the Southern Squadron. Now, it's going to be for the new reader and also the old reader. It's a re-examination of the origin of the Dark Nebula. And what I was glad I was able to sell to Dave DeVries was say, look, if you look back at the original origin back in 1982, there are scenes in between that can exist, which we haven't seen. I said, why can't that be that the Squadron are already established and the Dark Nebula is coming? And really the bottom line about it is, here's this super team that is supposed to be the Vanguard, and an Omega level character is coming down. Now it could be he could be our savior, he could be our doom. And well, because the Dark Nebula and the Southern Squadron do so well together, we actually build this as together again for the first time, because we've had the Dark Nebula and the Southern Squadron. And look, some people might look at it and go, oh, you've done a bit of retconning and whatever. We might do a little bit of retconning. We might do a bit of MCUing with our story. But guess what? We're the creators. It's not like you got some numbnuts who's come along 30 years later to say, oh, here, I'm going to reinvent the wheel and we'll just throw the baby out with the bathwater and we'll do the retconning. No. The creators.
Exactly. You have the free reign.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's amazing.
It's like, here are all your chess pieces. Let's just shuffle the board a bit.
Yeah.
That's all it is. But it's not that much of a departure from how it was, but by the same token, it's not slaved to it. And the most important thing about that is with all this new material coming out, and let me be clear, the Southern Squadron are coming back in their own right, in their own title. People won't have to go, oh, hang on, there's 40 years of history for both the Dark Nebula and the Southern Squadron. How am I going to keep up with it? No. What you do, you start here with Dark Nebula Southern Squadron number 1. You read issues 1 through to 3, and then read all the new stuff. And if you feel so inclined, go chase the other stuff. But it's not like people are going to be, I don't know that I can really keep up with all of this. Well, they shouldn't have to. And it shouldn't be that much of a chore for them. But it's also something fresh for the people who've stayed with us all that time.
Exactly.
Yeah, your fan base will be ecstatic that they'll have something that they know, but also something that they don't, all wrapped in a nice little bow for them. And I think that's, as a fan, that makes so much difference to us.
And Tad, for the listeners out there, where can they find your find all these books, these amazing titles? Southern Squadron and Dark Nebula. Well,
I still have a retail outlet on indieplanet.com, and that's not just print copies. They can also download digitally the color tracks that I did. That's very important because you've got to keep in step with all technologies. Now, having said that, I'm looking to release my new material through there as well for the US audience.
Nice.
What I've done is locally I've put stuff up for people to get on the Owner Indie site, the Australian Owner Indie site. So if people see, Dark Nebula 10, I didn't manage to get the get it when we did the promotion on the Grail Hunters group on Facebook or any of the comic shops that decided to stock it. Well, they can go to Owner Indie, and look, whenever I get an order from on Owner Indie, I always sign the books.
Oh, lovely.
Nice.
Well, it's just a courtesy that I believe people are entitled to. I think what's probably going to be rare are comics of mine that aren't signed.
Yes, and here's a link here for indieplanet.com. But no, it's been an awesome pleasure meeting you today, Tad. Thank you so much for your time.
It was wonderful to speak to you and listen to your musings and information and all the things that you've shared with us. So thank you very, very much.
I appreciate that, and I wanted to be clear about the fact that I have a lot of people to be grateful to. All those people who've been along the way with me. I'd like to think that maybe somewhere down the line, if, gee whiz, I don't know, I happen to get a TV or movie deal, I have to take care of my friends. And anyone who's helped me, they know that they've got a place in that lineup.
No, that's amazing, and I do appreciate how humble you are as well, and your wealth of knowledge is just mind blowing.
Well, if I had an ego about myself, I wouldn't last very long. I mean, seriously,
your head would explode.
Make a brass razoo out of this, but it is literally a labour of love.
We can see that.
Yeah. I've always believed that to get by in life, or to make your mark in life, you just need one good idea. Well, I'd like to think I had two: the Dark Nebula and my other character, the Golden Age Southern Cross.
Nice.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, guys, and on behalf of myself and Tracy, thank you so much for joining us on the Think Indie Pod. Thank our guest, Tad P. Follow us on comiccrusaders.com and also click like and subscribe in the details below. And see you all next time.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed this Comic Crusaders production. For real-time news on all things pop culture, please feel free to follow us on social media. For articles, original content, merchandise, and more, please go to www.comiccrusaders.com. Also follow along with all of the websites in the Comic Crusaders family. As always, if you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the Comic Crusaders YouTube channel.